Well, hey everyone out there on YouTube and Facebook, joining us live today for our Intellectual Horsepower episode, sponsored by MaxiForce today. I'm joined in studio by Paul Kelly, president of MaxiForce, and Brian Menke. He's owner of R&R Engine and Machine here in Akron. Guys, thanks for joining today, and we're excited to talk about a cool topic, and one that I'm sure many shops out there are going to be interested in knowing much more about, in light and medium duty diesel replacement parts. And for anyone who saw our promotions around this episode, we have that whole mantra of stop saying no to opportunity. Yeah. And Paul, I got to give you the credit for that. You've been seeing it over these number of years at MaxiForce that folks are turning away work unnecessarily.
Unfortunately.
When it comes to the light and medium duty diesel stuff. And Brian, I'm sure you've got your own story, prior to working with MaxiForce, so we certainly want to get into all of that. But Paul, I'm going to turn it to you first to just, explain that stop saying no to opportunity mantra and, really what it means for the guys watching.
Yeah, I think it all starts with the light to small and medium duty equipment, right? MaxiForce is 100% off-road diesel, aftermarket engine parts and bolt-on parts. And so what we identified about a decade ago was just the explosion of small equipment, from skid steers to mini excavators, and that just the amount of brands out there in that space, where it used to be 3 brands 20 years ago, it's 15 of them now, covering probably a range of about 4 to 5 different engines, really. Ryan, we can get into that later, but there's a plethora of OE brands of small equipment that use about 4 or 5 different engines, and it's just growing exponentially. And shops are saying no to engine work and engine rebuilding on brands they've never heard of, where the engine may be an engine they're very familiar with, but they're not familiar with the brand of the equipment, and they're saying no. Yeah. And they're saying no to the opportunity to rebuild what are actually, you can get into this as well, Ryan, not very complex rebuilds and very profitable rebuilds. And so when I said stop saying no, stop saying no to opportunity, that's what we kind of, we just try to bang our customers over the head with, right?
Right. Yeah, and then, it sounds like it's that mentality that they just don't understand where they can find the parts. It sounds like in a lot of cases, people are being told to just change out the entire engine because it's so difficult to find replacement parts or so costly, and they just don't know where to turn to, and that's where you guys at MaxiForce come in. So Brian, I'll turn it over to you for a second here. Let's tell the folks a little bit about what your shop focuses on, and when it comes to that light and medium duty diesel stuff, what was it like prior to knowing that MaxiForce had offerings for you?
Okay, yeah, we specialize in engines only, machining, parts, and rebuilding, turbocharger fuel injection also. 56 years now in business, and it's really changed over the years.
Yeah.
Like you said, the small diesel, the Cat 2.2, the 3.3, and the 4.4 is a big opportunity for everybody. The Yanmars here again, and the Kubotas. So we're just not only doing machine work now, but these customers now have an opportunity to buy parts. And get their jobs going at much better rates than OEM parts.
Yeah. And back in the day, did you find yourself turning away some of that work?
We turned a lot of parts work away, sure,
Okay,
because we didn't know where to go. They can go to CAT, we can go to CAT. They can go somewhere else, same as us. But now we can offer a nice MaxiForce kit or parts for it and help them along.
Absolutely. Paul, I'll come back to you. The other day when we were chatting, you were talking about how there's all these different brands of, the skid steers and the backhoes and excavators and things like that, but it's really just a few engine suppliers. But that's where the confusion kind of comes in, that a lot of these folks don't know that it's really just 3 or 4 different engine manufacturers.
The example that I use a lot, and I'm sorry to interrupt, the Takaguchi. If you go to any United rental yard, which we just drove by one on the way over here today, they're almost exclusively Takaguchi, which is a Japanese brand. But the engine, Takaguchi never made an engine, right? And so if a shop got a call for some engine parts on Takaguchi, they might say, I don't know where to get Takaguchi, but that's a Yanmar engine.
Yeah.
right? And it's almost 95% going to be Yanmar in all that piece of equipment. Komatsu is another example. Under 200 horsepower Komatsu equipment is all Yanmar powered. A lot of people don't know that, so they turn it down and say, I don't know how to get the small Komatsu stuff. And then there's a bunch of brands like that. New Holland skid steers and K skid steers are powered by an engine that you worked on successfully, which is a Shibata engine, another Japanese-made engine. And so a lot of shops say, I've never heard of Shibata engines. I don't know where to get parts for that. When that's powering the third most popular skid steer manufacturer in the United States.
Yeah.
All the New Holland and K skid steers. So when you hear the shop saying no, you're like, oh, because there's outside of MaxiForce in the aftermarket, there's options for Deutz and Yanmar and Fiat Powertrain and Kubota and Yanmar, which are here, and the small Deere engines, which are also Yanmar engines painted green.
Right.
So there's a ton of opportunity in the aftermarket that the shops are currently saying no to more than yes right now.
Yeah. Yeah. And Brian, I guess you could probably answer this. Most of these shops have the capability to do this work, right? It's not something that you really need a ton of different and new stuff to be able to work on these engines, correct?
Well, there are some little small tooling involved, maybe
But a shop that's well equipped.
well equipped. No,
Yeah.
it's all the same, different diameters, different sizes, but no, it's
Yeah.
pretty much all the same.
Yeah. So it's really just that understanding of knowing that they have a.
You can invest in a little bit of tooling here and there, pilots or reamers or something, but the investment is well worth it.
Yeah, yeah, certainly. And we'll get into that money side in a second because obviously that's what everyone's in business for. That's what the opportunity is that money, that additional revenue stream that they're currently turning away. But Paul, I wanted to come back to you about why some of these pieces of equipment have become so popular. I understand it's part of the country's infrastructure these days that kind of makes some of these pieces of equipment necessary, right?
Yeah, I think what we had touched on a little bit when we spoke last week was that for the majority of the United States, we are not building the country anymore. We are repairing it. And we're dropping 5G lines all over the country. And to repair and to drop 5G and do this type of equipment, you do not need a bulldozer anymore. You don't need a massive 10-ton excavator. You can get a skid steer that has 300 potential attachments on it and it can do 20 different things in the same job site, right? So we like to call it the Swiss Army knife of equipment. Mini excavators and skid steers can do 10 things on the same day, right? You can drill, you can scoop it, you can sweep it, you can do a bunch of things with it, which makes the piece of equipment so popular. It also makes it sometimes the engines have issues because not necessarily were they meant to be halfway upside down drilling things or on the side of a road mowing a highway, right? So just because they have the attachments doesn't mean the engines were designed to do this. So it does good things for us and for us, right? Because they do put the engines in some stress, which we can get into later.
Yeah.
But the popularity of these pieces of equipment are only going to grow. The attachments that drive that growth is only going to continue to grow.
Yeah.
Right. And so when you get into that, that's where the space seems, and that's why there's 15 players in it. 25 years ago, it was Bobcat, Cat, Deere.
Yeah.
Now there's 15 brands vying for the same, piece of the skid steer, mini excavator, mini loader pie, right? And so the reason that that's happening is one, the equipment is super popular. The equipment is very profitable for the OEs to sell. And the engines are simple, but just not known. But the attachments are never going to end. And that is going to continue to drive the growth of this equipment.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
And a small engine displacement nowadays has so much horsepower to it. You're squeezing so much horsepower out of a small, 2.2 liter engine that it's tough on them.
Yeah.
Turbocharged, EGR now systems, coolers.
Yeah, we can get into that later on the Tier 4 stuff. It's amazing how that's, we're Tier 4 final on most of this stuff now because of how, what they're trying to get out of these little engines is, it's a little bit much.
Yeah. So, Brian, do you want to get into a little bit about what you most commonly see in terms of, I don't know if you even know specifically what equipment it's coming from. Like, do you just get engines into your shop or?
We do a little bit of both.
Yeah.
We do get chippers and skid steers in, but for the most part it's engine work. A lot of Yanmar, Kubota, the cat we just saw today, the 2.2 cat in the shop, getting bored and honed.
Yeah.
But those you knew were in a skid steer.
Yes.
So, and you'll know, a lot of the shops we talk to, you'll know that it's in a skid steer because that equipment makes money for whoever owns it.
Yeah.
Right? And so they pressure, unfortunately, you guys to
Oh yeah,
get it out in a really unrealistic timeline.
it is. It's hard to do.
Yeah. That's something that we've heard a lot of that.
And Paul, that's a great point. You know, these are money-making pieces of equipment that guys don't want down. To Brian and Paul, if you guys want to talk a little bit about that downtime and the difference between someone suggesting that you should do a whole engine swap versus, you know, being able to fix, you know, something with a couple of replacement parts.
From our perspective, and Brian, I'll jump in real quick. On our John Deere line, for example, this is a steel piston for a big John Deere that's in combines, right?
Yeah.
Most farmers don't have one combine. They don't have one farm tractor. They've got several. So one's down, you can continue the operation, and when season's over, that's when you repair. On the side of the light equipment and light construction side, the mom and pop doesn't have 5 skid steers. If you know, for the most part, they've got 1 or 2. And for the local guy that makes swimming pools or fences or whatnot, they don't have 10 of these pieces of equipment. So
Yeah.
you know, they got 1 skid steer, 1 mini excavator, the pool guy, and the guy that bobs fencing has 2 or 3 of each. And so when one's down, you've got an employee who can't work that day, and you know, and you can't complete the job. So I think on that end, we've heard that from the shop owners. Like, that's why I said where they have an unrealistic timeline, because on our ag business and John Deere, you don't feel that pressure. But on this stuff and the small Kubota, Yanmar, Deere, Cat, Komatsu, the shops that are into it do feel a pressure to get it out.
They want it today.
Yeah,
They want
that's
it
not
immediately. It's not going to happen.
It's not realistic. You have to tear it down. You got to clean it up. You got to get the kit. You got to order the right parts with the bearings. With it, you know, you got to. Are you going to turn the crank?
Yeah.
But we feel that on this piece of our business, on the non-ag, it is a totally different clientele, and the demands are those of which machines that make money,
Yeah.
right? And in the rental world, that's a whole other thing. That's a whole other world where that piece of equipment is depreciating, and they have a whole accounting situation going on there, and that's a whole other thing where they want, or they were such in a hurry they'll swap the engine out and they wouldn't rebuild them.
Yeah.
Or that's where the opportunity is. What we keep talking about.
Yeah.
But it's the pressure that these things make money.
Yeah. No, Paul, that was right where I was going to go. Actually, you know, where are shops going to find business from? You just mentioned the rental, you know, opportunity there, but as well as, you know, folks who are using them for construction and various other, you know, farming and whatnot. Do you want to talk a little bit about, you know, where some of these opportunities lie?
Yeah, it's in multiples. First, the OEs, which is I'm really happy we saw your shop today, because they have a phenomenal shop that does a lot of work for the big, large OEs. They can't get to the work. One, don't have access to the parts, even though they're an OE. And so that's one of the interesting opportunities, even with your local OE dealer, whether it be New Holland or CAT or Deere. And then the rental world, especially the mom and pop rental, maybe not the United as much, but the regional or local rental shop that has 50 skid steers or 50 mini excavators, it could be a huge opportunity there. Sure. If I was a shop, I would knock on the door and tell them, we've got parts for that Takeguchi and that Gale and that Mustang and that Komatsu skid steer and that Deere and that Cat.
Yeah.
Because there's an opportunity that I think they should see. And also in the small construction companies, right? Every town has a local construction company, pool maker, fence guy, fence installer. There's a lot of opportunities out there in those niche fields where they don't know they have an opportunity, and so one of the problems is that if you go to New Holland, since they didn't make the engine, their availability on the parts, which I think you can get into, is not very good, right. And the price point is very high. And so even with the OE dealers, like I was saying, there's opportunity in these small bore diesel engines. In the niches of the spaces like rental and light construction companies, but then also in the OEs, locally in town.
Yeah, excellent. Brian, I'm going to kick it back to you for a second. Again, going back to what life was like prior to working with someone like MaxiForce and knowing that these replacement parts and kits are available. What's it been like since working with them and getting that extra revenue stream that previously
It's been
were
awesome working
turning
with
away?
MaxiForce. I mean, their online cataloging, their online ordering is awesome.
Yeah.
Before them, we just have to turn the customer back to the OE,
Yeah.
and you're at their mercy
Yeah.
for parts, at pricing, and everything else. And so now we have great opportunity to broaden our whole business, all
Yeah.
these different manufacturing lines.
Yeah. Yeah, very good.
They're a perfect example of that. So they are one of the few, unfortunate clients of ours that has really dug deep into our offering, and we looked at what you guys had purchased over the last, say, 2 or 3 years. Was like over eight brands, over 8 different brands, from Mitsubishi to Yanmar to Komatsu to Kubota. I mean, so that's where the opportunity lies. Is in looking deep into not only ours but others in the aftermarket and what they could potentially offer you on equipment that you didn't know you could get parts for.
Yeah. Yeah, that's great. Brian, I had a question for you. Looking at the gas world, a lot of shops specialize, right? They might just do Chevy, or they might just do Ford, or, these days LS might be the only thing that they do. When it comes to the types of engines we've been talking about today, is that something that folks need to think about, or are those 3-4 different engines similar enough that they could take all of that work in?
They're very similar. I mean, they're all bores and they're all different sizes. But when you get into diesel, there are some different head tooling you need for tooling and injector wells, things like that.
Okay.
But basically, you're surfacing a head, you're decking a block, you're boring a hole, honing it,
Yeah.
redoing the connecting rods. So they're very similar.
Yeah.
Tolerances are much tighter, though. You got to watch out for protrusion and
Okay.
for the pistons and they're raising out of the hole, or just cylinder head valve protrusion or recession.
Yeah.
That'd be really critical.
In his shop today, there was C15 cats, Chevy blocks for this little cat engine, and Kubotas and Yanmar. So if you're tooled up anywhere near to how they are, you can easily do a small bore diesel engine if you're doing a small block Chevy.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Well, and that's exactly what these guys should be, their ears should be perking up, right?
That's the hope.
Yeah. So, Brian, again, I'll come to you to talk specifics about, what you see with these engines when they come in. What are some of the more common ones? What are some of the common issues with them? Again, like Paul had mentioned, they're just being used so much and beaten and abused. You want to talk a little bit about what you guys see?
Yeah, I think the first thing is maintenance. Changing the oil on these EGR engines, after cooled engines. After maintenance would become air quality. You are recycling all that EGR back into the engine.
Yeah.
The intakes are getting clogged up with carbon. So the valves get carbon, the intakes get carboned up. They're working hard, they're working hot.
Yeah.
And it takes a lot of maintenance to keep them up and running.
Yeah, absolutely. And then do you see specific things from specific engines and
Not necessarily. I mean,
applications?
you might have a new engine might come out and they work out the bugs. They have problems here and there. But over time, the bugs are worked out and you know what to look for. It might have a drop valve or maybe a seat issue.
Yeah.
A lot of the high horsepower engine, you're looking at bottom end failures, rod bearings, main bearings, things like that.
Okay. And outside of that routine maintenance type work, if you have to get into a little bit more extreme machining and things like that, what does that typically look like for you?
Extreme machining, like as in,
Well, just above and beyond your simple repair, like
Okay.
this just needed some oil change, and vice versa. When you're getting a little deeper into fixing some issues.
a lot of problems nowadays are cracked cylinder heads or cracked
Okay.
blocks.
Yeah.
With the heat and everything, the guys tear it down to rebuild it, thinking they had an overheating issue. Here they have a cracked head.
Yeah.
So now you got to call them back and say, hey, you're going to be extra, $2-3 grand for a new head. Like, oh boy, but it adds up.
That's why we sell. That's why we sell heads.
Well, exactly. So yeah.
So-
and it-
But what we hear a lot, and sorry to interrupt, but what we hear a lot from the shops is what Brian just mentioned, running hot. Due to these attachments that I keep mentioning, a lot of the time these engines are going through experiences that the engine itself wasn't designed for.
yeah.
So if you're having a skid steer halfway upside down, you're running oil all the way to the back, maybe that engine wasn't designed to do that, and then you're pressing it heavily and pushing on it and asking a lot of it, and we hear a lot about running it hot. Since the majority of the operators of these equipments don't own it, it tends to be that the maintenance isn't like it would be on
Not
your
pri-
combine. that
Not
you
priority.
own.
Yeah.
If you own a John Deere combine, you own it, and you're going to hold it for a long time, and you're going to really keep to the maintenance. If you're just all day long drilling away at repairing sidewalks for the city of Akron, or you got contracted by the city to repair.
Yeah.
The maintenance isn't the highest priority. It's getting the job done at the most profitable possible, and that is where there's a lot of opportunity in these engines.
Yeah, because like you just said, folks are beating them up and then not necessarily caring that
As much.
an issue's going to come. Yeah, very good. So Brian, you were just walking through some of the common things that you see in the shop and common things that you guys will have to be, machining or replacing in terms of parts. Paul, I'll ask you from the MaxiForce side, what are some of the more common kits and types of parts that you guys are seeing getting purchased?
Outside of the overhaul kit, which for these pieces of equipment, at the price point that MaxiForce can get you a kit, it makes sense to reman the engine. If the engine, especially if the equipment is down, you might as well just take it out and overhaul the whole engine, which is the most common. On the wear parts, it's the turbos and the pumps.
Okay.
And nowadays the common rail injectors
Yeah.
are really caught on because they have issues.
Yeah.
And he can expound to that in much smarter than I can, but they have a lot of issues.
Yeah.
And so we've gotten on to the common rail side of the injection because they're having a lot of problems. But for the most parts, like I said, the overhaul kit is really the best bang for your buck when it comes to these pieces of equipment because the OEs don't offer overhaul kits for them.
Yeah.
So we invented them. Many others in the aftermarket have invented overhaul kits for other engines. So the overhaul kit is an opportunity to just get that engine out, completely rebuild it, put it back, and let it run for another year or two, right? And so that's why it makes sense. And the OEs, first, don't have a kit, and two, if you were to put together a kit with the OE, the price point almost makes it not make sense to do it. And so that's where we in the aftermarket, like MaxiForce, come in. And so the most common thing would be the overhaul kit.
Yeah.
That's really the home run for the owner of the equipment.
Yeah.
We find that a lot in a customer going to the OEM for OEM parts. You add it all up and like, well, he can sell you an engine for this much
Right,
now.
yeah.
So it's like, well, it's out of the price point.
Absolutely.
Which is why we had to invent our overhaul kits have overhaul gasket sets because the OEs in this space for some reason didn't make gasket sets. Or the big Cat engines, Cat has a gasket set, but the tiny Cat engines like this one, they don't.
Yeah.
And so that's why we've been trying to create like a one part number holistic solution to the engine. But it takes a lot of what we're doing today is introducing it and really allowing the engine rebuilder to know that this exists
Yeah.
because it doesn't exist on the OE side.
Right.
So there's no comparable, right? And so that's why the overhaul kit is really the big bang for your buck, dude.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
an important piece.
No, that's fantastic. I'm just going to take 1 second and address our live audience. If you guys are out there on YouTube or Facebook, make sure you're typing in the comments if you guys have a question that you want to ask. And again, I'm joined by Paul Kelly of MaxiForce and Brian Menke of R&R Engine and Machine here in Akron. And we're talking about light and medium duty diesel replacement parts. And both you guys were just talking a little bit about, the price point of the kits and, the popular kits that get used. And we got a question here from somebody about the price point of a Kubota rebuild kit and what's all included. So maybe can you guys give the high level, what's the cost of stuff from the OEM versus, what they can get stuff at MaxiForce for and what they get?
You would have a better on the OE side. I mean,
If you would take, for example, X amount of dollar from MaxiForce, you could add easily 25-35% to that for an OEM kit.
Yeah, yeah,
But our price point on the kit is going to be 60% less, 70% less than Kubota. If you would have to piece out all the gaskets, then you would have to piece out the piston, pin, the retainers, so the let's say four pistons, and then you have to buy the bearings, the crank seals, and you're going to be, I would assume we're going to be 60-70% less if you pieced out a kit from Kubota.
All individual parts, yes.
And so we're going to be, to whoever asked the question, from the shop, you're going to get it from the kit from the shop at 50% less easily
yeah,
from the OE.
yeah,
Kubota.
And a good point is, if they buy the kit from MaxiForce, they have a warranty. If you go back to Kubota, what are they going to do? Well, here's a piston, I'm sorry, here's a ring, here's a bearing. No, they're not going to do anything for you.
right,
So at
right.
least you can talk to these guys, you can contact them, they have great support. So.
Yeah, and like you said, the kit comes with everything that you're going to need to get that machine back up and running. And
It's supposed to be a one
Yeah.
part number holistic rebuild solution for the engine.
yeah, so certainly a much easier process than, like you said, having to find every little part that you need one at a time.
Especially on the gaskets, you're going to have to buy, I don't know how many O-rings, how many little turbo mounting, oil cooler mounting. You're going to have to buy our set probably has 50 loose parts in it in our overall gasket set. So that alone, you have to piece that together. That's very time consuming for a shop to do.
Yeah.
And I would understand why they would turn that away, because that just takes a lot of time.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that's why we don't go to the market unless we have a kit,
Yeah.
right? So we've got Kubota parts that we haven't marketed yet because we don't have a complete kit yet.
Yeah.
Till we have that, we don't feel that the value is really there. And so that's why we wait, and that's why we always go to the market with a kit and the bolt-on parts around it.
Yeah. That's excellent. Brian, on the flip side, can you talk a little bit about some of the margins that are involved for you on the shop side in terms of being able to do this work and not turn it away? Obviously you don't have to give crazy details of what your pricing necessarily is, but how has it been as a revenue stream, for the shop?
Revenue has been great. I mean, not only are we doing machine work and fuel injection work, but we're selling parts for the same engine. So you can easily make a good 25, 35% on a kit, and it'll still be under the OE and still have a happy customer.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Very good. And then we got a question here from someone on YouTube about the fact that they get cracked heads all the time from guys just working the machines hard. And they're asking how long an engine would last after an overhaul kit is installed. Is there a...
Same as an OEM brand new engine. I mean, it's all new parts.
Yeah.
We tend to warranty it at times more than the OE.
Okay.
So our kits are warranted for a year. Sometimes especially the Tier 4 stuff, that's not the case on the parts anymore.
No, not anymore.
So that we, regardless of Tier 4 final or non-tiered, we're a year. So you're the shop is covered without our parts for a year.
Okay.
Regardless of ours.
Yeah. Yeah. Very cool. No, that's great. Now, Paul, you brought up the Tier 4 stuff a couple times, and I know you said there's some differences involved there. Did you want to dive in some details about some of that?
Well, the one thing that was interesting about Tier 4, especially Tier 4 final Tier 4, we were kind of talking about that earlier today. It has hit, the demand for those engines to be rebuilt has hit much faster than it used to. And I'll let Brian explain the more details as towards why, but in the aftermarket, you used to wait, let's say, an engine would come out today, you would wait 10 to 8 years for it to get a demand in the aftermarket.
Yeah.
Tier 4 final, it's like a year.
Yeah.
And that was never the case in my 18-year career. So those engines are running way too hot using the same heads, which is why I think he's getting the cracked heads.
Probably.
And they're running way too hot, and they're using the same heads, same blocks from the non-tiered Ford finals. So they're reusing the heads and blocks, but under much, much harsher conditions. And I'll let you kind of expound as towards why. But that is something that has hit us much faster than we had anticipated, the demand for Tier 4 final. So which is why that's a Tier 4 final. There's a Yanmar one there that's a Tier 4 final, the 98 millimeter. We were the final. We're taking our entire Deere line to Tier 4 final. The demand there, the OEs don't warranty those engines anymore for 2 years. They only warranty them for 1 now.
Okay.
And so, but I'll let Brian kind of get into a little bit about what he was showing me today, some of the things that are happening. But I'll let you.
Well, let's take an example for a Cat 2.2. Look at the horsepower they're squeezing out of that nowadays. It's tremendous. And you do that because of fuel. So you got to up the fuel, got to up the compression. You got to put EGR on it now. So now instead of a nice clean air filter and air coming in, now you have exhaust going back through the intake system. So it's hard on the rings, hard on the pistons, the bores.
Yeah.
It's hard on the seats and the valves.
Yeah.
And it's cracking heads.
And they run much hotter, yes.
Very good. Let's see here. We got a question about. All right, so we got a comment here. It's a little. Got some feedback for you guys at MaxiForce saying the kit has great products, but the gasket quality could be a little bit better. They're asking if there's any opportunities there that you guys might be looking into.
Yeah, absolutely. I think
up in some of that.
as we're developing these engines out, there is idiosyncrasies within Kubota and Cat and the small Shibaras and the Deeres, and so there is times in which when you launch a kit, and especially a gasket kit, which is the toughest part about developing an overhaul kit, really is the gaskets, because you have to first try to make the most complete set possible, which at the beginning sometimes you don't do, and you're missing a piece. I'm sure that's happened where one of our sets is missing something, or the turbo mounting gasket isn't at the quality we would like, but it was something got us to launch.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's always opportunities to improve.
Yeah.
I agree with whoever asked the question. We're always trying to improve, and sometimes you'll have a water pump mounting gasket that's metal with bonded rubber, and something we did, and we launched the kit without the metal one. We tried to do it with a paper one, and we didn't know, and so that happens sometimes.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, there's always times, especially in gasketing, looking back at how to make it a perfect set. I don't know if it exists, a perfect gasket set. Others in the aftermarket, like IPD, really try to make the perfect set. But we try. But yeah, there's always opportunity to improve.
Yeah. We got other people here saying, I've been selling MaxiForce engine kits for years. Great company, great products, fantastic customer support. So you got some fans out there as
You
well.
could have started with that one.
No, I mean, pretty minor thing, if it's just the gasket that maybe they had an issue with. So
Gaskets are complicated.
Yeah, for sure.
And there's always, you're never finished, ever. So I agree with whoever asked the
And
question.
gaskets are hit and miss. I mean, you can use an OEM head gasket, and you might blow a head gasket, and they're like, well, why to do it? So
Yeah.
there's issues with everything. It all depends on the surface of the head, the microns, the block,
yeah.
the liner
Oh, yeah.
protrusion. It's a lot of things.
I was going to blame the OEs too, but I said, from the aftermarket, I can't do that.
But it happens.
I
and,
can't do that,
The best thing to do is take care of it and move on and improve.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Well, that's what's always amazed me about a majority of engine parts aren't very complicated, or at least they're seemingly not complicated,
Getting
right?
more complicated.
And then there's actually a lot of complexity under the surface, right?
Especially on the Tier 4 final and all that.
Yeah.
The common rail up the ante for those who do fuel, for sure, and on the failure side of engines. So, yeah, it's gotten a little more complicated.
Yeah. Brian, I'm going to come back to you again from the shop perspective. Guys that have traditionally maybe been turning away this work, and they're hearing this testimony and us talking about it and the potential for revenue. What are some pieces of advice you'd give them in terms of taking that on?
Well, if you're turning away work because of a smaller engine or you don't know about it, I hope they're members of AERA because you can join that organization and get the specs right there online. So it's not about specs. You can get a hold of those. You can also call your AER tech line for help if you need it. But you shouldn't turn anything away, especially machine work. And once you get the machine work in, you can load the parts on top of that, make a sale on top of that too.
Yeah.
The mention of the AERA and the ADS, which is
Association
another,
Diesel Specialists, yes.
the Association of Diesel Specialists, which he's very involved in, those are such resources where, like, we have the specs too on our website. We offer the specs to our clients from the AERA for those who are not members, which we always encourage them to become members. But yeah, that's an important mention because we're a huge supporter of the AERA, and that's a wealth of knowledge with all the guys there when you call. I mean, all the engine specs for these engines are there, all of them.
Yeah.
It's a great tool.
That's fantastic. Now, Brian, you said earlier, it's machining a hole, it's surfacing a head, it's engine work is engine work, so to speak.
Well,
but there are a few things to look
there are
out for.
differences, yes.
Do you want to speak a little bit more in detail about?
Yeah, you have the
some
high
of that
ductile
stuff?
iron now on blocks. You have the coating on the blocks. Some require diamond honing instead of just regular stone honing. So you have to be careful about the finishes, the surfaces,
Yeah,
and how to do that.
yeah. You were talking about some of the specs, but just also a little differences in terms of certain heads or one engine to the next. Is there anything that
Yes,
you want to
every
elaborate there?
manufacturer head has a different either protrusion or recession on the head valve. So you got to make sure that's correct.
Yeah,
And Kubota's one of them on the cylinder heads where there's a ton of differences. Thicknesses, notches, the Shibara New Holland case cat, small Perkins engine has the New Holland skid steers use a thicker head gasket, another one use a multi-layered steel head gasket. On the cat side, New Holland doesn't use multi-layered steel, they use composite graphite. So the same engine.
Yeah.
New Holland decided that the composite graphite was better, and Cat decided the multi-layered steel was better.
yeah,
If you're in diesel too, for an injector protrusion, you just got to make sure that's right. If you're putting a well in it, that's critical. So
yeah.
They are small engines, but they definitely have their little idiosyncrasies, as you were saying. I mean,
Right.
they do.
Thank you. I slipped up on getting that word out earlier.
That's what I'm here for.
Brian, what about some of the turnaround time? We talked about earlier that's crucial for these guys to get back up and running with these machines, because they're making money using these pieces of equipment. When you guys are installing, a typical MaxiForce overhaul kit, what's kind of the turnaround time for a shop like yours?
Well, right now we're pretty backed up. Springtime's very busy.
Sure.
And a lot of work out there. So yeah, we're probably 2-3 weeks out at least.
Okay.
On some stuff like that, maybe even more.
Yeah. But in a perfect world, if you guys were getting through work pretty quick, is it potentially quicker than that?
It would be, yes. I'm short on people. Everybody knows, looking for good help.
Sure.
And I would say a week and a half to 2.5 weeks would be the ideal turnaround time.
Okay. All right. So a little above that, but that's not too bad, especially these days. I think everyone's in a similar boat, right?
Yeah.
Very good. We do have a question here asking if MaxiForce works with Diesel FP.
FP Diesel?
I'm not sure.
FP Diesel is an old brand, much like MaxiForce, that I assume that's what they're talking about. Oh, they're talking about, it's a company called F Diesel. No, we have nothing to do with that.
Okay.
Nothing.
Okay. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. I'm not familiar with exactly what they're asking. So
Yeah, no, it's a non-supported aftermarket brand.
okay.
So it doesn't really have any support behind it. I think they have some parts here. I'm not sure where they come from. The logo is very similar to FP's, but it's not a real thing.
Okay. Fair enough. Guys, again, if you guys have questions for Paul or for Brian about some of these overhaul kits and the parts, or just about the light and medium duty diesel engines themselves, please put that stuff in the comments, and while we got them here live, we'll be happy to answer that stuff. Paul and Brian, I think it's a good opportunity to just kind of recap exactly what we've been talking about, with the Stop Saying No to Opportunity, with the amount of work that's out there, with the parts that are available from folks like MaxiForce. Paul, I'll turn to you first just to kind of recap exactly, what these guys are leaving on the table by not investing more time understanding, what they could be doing here, right?
Yeah, I think one of the ones that I always try to mention is Bobcat. So Bobcat invented the wheel loader, I think in Minnesota 60 years ago.
Yeah.
And for its entire life of Bobcat up until 2015, it was Kubota powered. And you're talking about the leader in that space, it's light equipment, still the leader today, which is surprising that Cat hasn't caught them.
Yeah.
But they're still the leader in what it is, the mini excavator and skid steers. They invented it, they're the leader, and they've been powered for 60, 70 years, I don't know how long, by Kubota. So if somebody calls and says, I need a Kubota water pump or a Bobcat water pump, 95% of the time, they're not asking for a Bobcat part number. They're asking for a Kubota water pump, right? But they say, I don't have access to Bobcat. I don't know anybody at Bobcat. No, but if you need to look in the aftermarket. There's, you look at MaxiForce, or go to Kubota, but they may, some shops will say, well, I don't have access to Bobcat parts. Well, Bobcat never made an engine. Bobcat to this day doesn't make an engine. In 2016, Bobcat became powered by Doosan because Doosan bought Bobcat. But up until 2016, really, when they started powering, it was all Kubota.
Yeah.
So if you think every Bobcat you've probably seen out there today on your way home is probably a Kubota engine in it.
Yeah.
Right? And it's not that many ranges. So I always mention that as an example. The same with Takaguchi or Cub Cadet or Gale or Mustang or New Holland or Case. But Bobcat is the easiest one. Bobcat never made an engine. Right? It's either going to be Doosan, which is available a little bit in the aftermarket now. We will be developing it soon. And almost exclusively Kubota.
Yeah.
So that's just the easiest one to remember. Don't call Bobcat. Or if you want to start with Bobcat, but Bobcat's going to give you a Bobcat number.
Right.
You can call your Kubota dealer, and it's going to be insanely expensive, or you could call us or your local shop and ask them.
Yeah.
Don't ask another shop down the street, but that's where I see Bobcat is the easiest one to really resonate as the opportunity.
Right. Right.
And just to back on that too, if somebody calls me for a Kubota pump or injector, Kubota doesn't make pump or injectors.
Yeah.
It could be Denso, Bosch, or
Yeah.
the new Kubotas are Delphi.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and Delphi, and the Doosan's are Delphi. So, yeah, you can't turn down business just because it says Doosan on it or Kubota or anything else.
Yeah, or Bobcat, or
Right.
Yeah.
all these other brands. Volvo skid steers are almost all Kubota. It's another brand.
Yeah. Right. So, again, what we've been talking about is really good margins, over OE stuff, and obviously an opportunity to expand your revenue, have a new revenue stream if you're a shop that's currently doing more of the performance, race engine stuff, and has been saying no to work like this. So you're getting increased business, and then hopefully repeat customers, right? If you're doing a good job with everything. Brian, do you want to just kind of speak to that? You've been in business over 55 years now?
Yeah, right, 56 years this year.
Yeah.
And we do everything from little tiny one-cylinder up to the V20s. So we've never turned anything down. We've always been optimistic on tooling and bringing it on board, learning it.
Yeah.
And don't turn anything down if you can.
Yeah.
You can't do it all, though. I mean, you get too busy, you can't do it all. I understand.
Sure.
But
Sure.
What you said about repeat is really important. If you've given this customer an opportunity to economically rebuild an engine for a skid steer that he uses to perform and make money, I guarantee you he's coming back. And that's something we hear from the shops that really get into it. Now we have certain shops around the country that only do small equipment, right? And I was talking to one in New Holland, Pennsylvania last week, where they are just really gotten into the niche of small equipment. They don't do big ag stuff anymore. They just do small, and they just swap them out with the companies that are laying fence or making pools or building homes. They send one in. It's they have a timer on the thing, a couple of $100, I don't know how many. They just send one in and repair and just have just a flow going with 4 or 5 customers. And I've heard that from shops where you're helping that company continue their business.
Oh, absolutely.
And so that repeat is going to happen. And I think you can attest to this. This will be the most margin a shop will make on parts, most likely, outside of maybe the really high-end performance stuff. Because the OE is so high here that you can get away with, you were saying, 35%, selling a kit. That's pretty good.
Yeah.
It's a little bit difficult to do that on a automotive application.
Right.
So it's harder.
Well, and again, those are the margins. Those OE prices are what is forcing people to say, okay, we got to swap the whole engine, right? And that's just something that most people don't want to stomach or don't want to have to, pay for. So it's great that you guys offer parts, and Brian, that you guys have a shop that
Absolutely
is willing to understand all this stuff and work on it.
we keep going because of MaxiForce.
Yeah, that's great.
We're doing good, and he's a big believer in the aftermarket as well. So they're expanded into, like he said, these huge engines, and the big component of it's helping you get into all these ranges, from this to the big ones, is the aftermarket, and the great brands that the aftermarket has on a lot of options. But there's a lot more people turning it down than accepting it right now.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's a big opportunity there.
And with that, I think all we can say is stop saying no to the opportunity. Look at what's right here in front of us and what we've been talking about today. Brian and Paul, I'm going to give you guys each just a last opportunity to weigh in on anything else that maybe we didn't quite cover, or just a last notion for the folks watching here.
Oh, for me, it's just, business is different than the last 10, 20 years, that's for sure.
Sure.
And just having the opportunity for parts be available to us, help the customers out, get them back on the road or the field or wherever it's at. That's where you need to be, and then we thank MaxiForce for that.
Yeah.
Well,
Excellent.
For sure. First, I want to thank you for coming and being an awesome and loyal, long-term customer. I want to thank everybody at Engine Builder for giving us this opportunity. We're incredibly honored to be here. I want to thank anybody in the audience who listened and participated today, so thank you very much. If anybody has any inquiries, please go to maxiforce.com and hit the Contact Us button, and we will call you immediately. And so we look forward to working with more shops, and we look forward to the shops taking on new opportunities.
Excellent, excellent. Well, guys, like Paul said, make sure you're checking out maxiforce.com and everything that they offer for the light and medium duty diesel replacement part market there. And as always, make sure you're checking out enginebuildermag.com for more engine content. Paul, Brian, thank you guys so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you guys all out there for watching today, and we'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.